Hey, I'm Kevin, and this is HFX by Bike, a channel all about getting around Halifax by bike. Except sometimes I make pitches about how to make existing bike infrastructure better to use. The Dartmouth Harbourwalk Trail is a multi-use path running between the Alderney and Woodside Ferry terminals on the Dartmouth side of the harbour. It is mostly okay. There aren't really any dramatic existential problems with it, and most of the things I'm going to address today fall under the heading of quality of life improvements. Things that I've noticed while riding on it or that others have mentioned while soliciting suggestions that could be better. The trail sort of peters out at the Alderney Ferry Terminal, but it doesn't really need to. There's space to have it continue up Alderney and to connect to the protected bike lanes on Weiss Road. I made a whole video about that connection, so I'm going to let the details live there and just add a link. Suffice to say that it's a viable option if we want to do it. The trail continues through the space behind the ferry terminal. This area does triple duty as a way for pedestrians and cyclists to access the trail, an access point for the ferry terminal itself, and an event space. All of this makes it pretty heavily congested with pedestrian traffic at times. The space is mostly unstructured, so we could try to differentiate between the space used for moving through the area on foot or bike and the space for events and access to the terminal. I'm not especially optimistic about this fix though. This space is probably too constrained for this, and it's always going to be a bit of a slow zone. Just south of the ferry terminal, the trail starts to look a bit more like a trail. Technically, this section is wide enough, hitting approximately 3 meters wide. However, being right up against the fence and having the foliage lean into the trail, it is in practice a bit narrower than that, creating a necessary closeness between pedestrians and cyclists. So this section could stand to be a little bit wider whenever it gets resurfaced. A little further east, the trail kind of just becomes a sidewalk. Mostly I assume this just isn't done yet, but obviously it should be widened into a proper trail. It's a pretty short stretch, so it's not a major fix. The issue extends to the intersection with King Street, where the two parts of the trail don't align with one another, so you theoretically have to dismount across. With a wider trail and some better aligned curb cuts, you can have easier movements to the intersection by bike. Crossing the canal and continuing down the path, you approach the area of Dartmouth Cove. Immediately after the canal bridge, the trail becomes a kind of weird guardrail protected sidewalk. It's not even really wide enough for people to walk in, and so for the most part, the road and the trail just kind of merge together between the bridge and Canal Street, which is not ideal. There's some heavy equipment moving through the area, but in general it's only serving a few properties and traffic is inherently pretty limited. I'm not sure if this space allows for much improvement, to be honest. One option would be to remove the guardrail and instead rely on paint to mark the boundaries of the trail. This makes the area more flexible, but then the utility poles are in the way and we're not really all that much better off. Alternatively, removing the guardrail and just quasi-pedestrianizing the space might work. If volumes of traffic are low enough, it's just a more formalized version of what people do already, but with a bit more extra space to accommodate everyone. The last option is to move the barrier to take up more of the road, effectively reducing it to a one-way at a time street. This might be slightly annoying for people parking at the 2 or 3 properties around the trail, but again, we're talking about a half dozen vehicles or so at a time. I don't really have strong thoughts about this one, but let me know in the comments what you think. On to something easy, the chicanes. The waterfront section of Dartmouth Cove sits on the opposite side of the CN rail tracks, meaning you have to cross it to both enter and exit this section of the trail. Each crossing point is covered by wooden chicanes that force most cyclists to dismount and awkwardly navigate through. This isn't necessary, and you can tell because there's no such chicanes at other parts where the rail line interacts with the trail. Like here at Alderney Landing, where the rail line just meanders through a fully pedestrianized plaza. Trains move through this part of Dartmouth once or twice a day at best, typically moving at barely more than walking speed. I don't think these chicanes are necessary. If something is, just throw a flashing light or a retractable arm barrier. They're not that expensive. Onto the cove itself, there's an ongoing melodrama about ownership and use. The city owns the trail, but the land next to the trail is owned by a local company, Atlantic Road Construction and Paving. The company would like to infill the cove with quarry rock and Fyric slate, filling in about 4.5 acres of space as they own the water lot and can make money by hauling and dumping it there. The pitch is then to use that space to create a park or a residential development opportunity, although it's not clear who would pay for that. Locals in the area are opposed, mostly on environmental grounds. The slate is acidic, but also because the process would disrupt the use of the trail for years on end. Legally, it's still up in the air. The city has said no, the province has deferred to the city, and the federal government still hasn't made a final decision. In the interim, the company has, for lack of a better term, thrown numerous hissy fits about it, illegally blocking the trail at times, and more recently putting up no trespassing signs, which in practice can only apply to the land next to the trail and not to the trail itself. I don't really have any strong thoughts about it, besides finding the company's behavior childish. The path of least resistance here is just to excise the lot next to the trail. The assessed value is only $200,000. The city can then make it into a small waterside park, or whatever. It would at least end the drama. Let me know what your preferred solution is here. Immediately after leaving the cove, we land on Old Ferry Road, and between here and Parker Street, we have a parking lot, basically. There are some parking spaces and then a former parking lot behind an apartment building that's been blocked off to make the trail more continuous. We can knock off those remaining parking spaces and make better use of this space behind the apartment building, maybe some flower beds or something that's cheap and easy to implement. The trail is, in principle, wide enough, but often becomes overgrown with plants at various points during the summer. A bit of trimming to keep the sightlines visible would be nice. The trail also isn't perfectly flat, and so water tends to pool in a few places. In the colder months it freezes over, creating small ice ponds, which makes the trail a lot harder to use for everyone. Adding in some drainage along these sections would be an improvement. The trail ends at the Woodside Ferry Terminal, but it doesn't have to. There are some pretty easy connections that we could make to the nearby suburban bike network. The end of the trail lands in the Ferry Terminal parking lot, but the Mount Hope Greenway is only 250 meters away at the intersection of Pleasant and Atlantic, so let's connect them. It's a parking lot without any buildings crowding it, so on some level the pathing of the connector doesn't really matter all that much. I've set this path along the northern part of the parking lot, crossed it at the entrance of the transit turnaround point, and then run it directly to the existing greenway. It's not in the direct work area for this project, but it's common for people to ask about connecting to the Shearwater Flyer 3 kilometers away. It's doable, and the city has actually already started drafting plans to do just that. Most of this section of Pleasant Street has 4 lanes, and as far as the city can tell, doesn't actually need that many. So the proposed plan is to yoink the southernmost lane and convert it to a two-way bike lane with some bonus green space. I checked over the city's design sketches, and yeah, this doesn't seem like it would actually impact how Pleasant Street works for motor vehicle traffic. It's just a bonus lane that serves no current function, and we can make better use of it. This could then run all the way to the Shearwater Flyer, although once you're clear of the more built-up area near Dartmouth, it might be cheaper to switch to a multi-use path. It's a long stretch of road, so I'm not going to bother sketching it out for this video. Those are some ideas I had for improving the Dartmouth Harbourwalk Trail. Let me know in the comments which options you'd like to see implemented, or if you have any of your own that you think would be better. Thanks for watching through to the end of the video. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos all about getting around Halifax by bike and urbanism more generally. Let me know which parts of Halifax's bike network you'd like to see fixed next. That's it for this one. As always, thanks for watching, and see you next time.